Well, fresh off the press was Toby Conway re-signing. You've had a suite of them this week. How exciting is it to get your long-term future in order?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to keep up with the announcements. Obviously, I'm privy to the information earlier, so it feels like old news for me. But I think what the Toby one specifically is an indication of the way we've sort of thought about Toby for a long time. And when I sort of try to explain that Toby's a long-term prospect for us and we're not thinking sort of week to week right at the moment, it can sound a bit hollow until you get some sort of like vindication in the form of a long-term contract. So hopefully that all starts to make a bit more sense now. And it's a good timing in a way because he's really starting to ramp up his training, along with Mitch Edwards as well, our other sort of young ruckman. So we're optimistic that those guys can be viable options at selection, in the next, well, I shouldn't put a number on it, but I'd say, in the first half of the season, those guys are going to be well and truly available for selection.
Cameron, you and Henry as well. How exciting is it to watch both blokes?
Yeah, Cameron's a little bit different to the other two, obviously, but we see no signs, of him slowing down. So we're sort of still thinking of him in his prime, and I think pleasingly, he's enjoying his footy. Sometimes guys get to that age, and it's not just how their body's going; it's how they're feeling, kind of mentally and emotionally about it all. And he seems as excited and enthusiastic for the contest as he's ever been. So. The contract status verifies that as well, and then we think Shannon Neal and Ollie Henry can be in our forward line for the next decade or so. It was a good start to the year for both of them last week, but again, we're more excited by the fact that their best footy is clearly in front of them.
Seems like just on the contract stuff that Sam McConey might be getting close to making a decision. I know you're probably looking at Mac right now.
I am. Well, these sort of, I feel a little uncomfortable talking about these things because I'm involved, but I'm not the decision maker, and I'm certainly not across the timing. So I get an indication, and really my role kind of stops when we decide as a list management group sort of what we want to happen. But it's one thing to want something to happen, and it's another thing for it to be executed. So what we want is clear. I'm not sure whether it's actually been done. Is there any breaking news there, Mac? Or close? Okay. That was a succinct version.
That's good. So do you feel, well, you obviously feel confident about Sam. In terms of Bailey Smith, I didn't see him out there today. Is he all good to go? He just wasn't at the captain front, I assume? Yeah,
I'm not exactly sure who was out there and who wasn't, so I don't keep up to date with that too much on this day. It was a pretty individual day. I'm sure you would have seen a few others not out there. Can't think off the top of my head, but.
Ross mentioned in his press conference he enjoys watching your press conferences, and then he also said that he might, he's got Bailey Smith earmarked for a fair bit of attention this week, given what he did last week. How do you go about preparing for that as a coach and also for him as a player? Yeah,
it would make sense. But he's a respectful kind of coach, especially when it comes to the opposition. So I wouldn't expect him to say that he wasn't concerned about any of our players. But I mean, Bailey had a good start, but. My read on the Saints is that they're always thoughtful around sort of the opposition sort of playmakers and the guys that make a difference. So he may have been asked that question, but I assume if he was asked about Stewart or Dangerfield or Holmes or whoever, he would have said a similar thing. With respect, I tend to not watch the press conferences. I'm not across exactly what he's said. But I appreciate the compliment. He wasn't trying to be funny, was he?
No, he was being serious.
Oh, okay.
He enjoys watching your presses.
Okay.
He says he enjoys watching the White Lotus as well, he said.
Yeah, okay.
Well, St. Kilda, last year, I think, round 23, you guys had a 33-point lead, and then they ended up getting out on top. I know it was late in the season, but because it was so late, does that mean there is relevance in looking back at that, preparing for this?
There's the last time you played a team always has some relevance, in my opinion. There are the odd outliers. Sometimes you haven't played a team for 12 months. That was an unusual game for us in that we hadn't played at Marvel almost all year, and we had patches in that game that we were really happy with. But it was really clear that, and even this year they played there 13 times. it was really clear that for a portion of that game they were just too good for us in the way that game was played. So I think it's relevant now because the game is slightly different at Marvel compared to the way it's played, say, at Adelaide Oval last week or Geelong the week before. And interestingly, in round 23, it's different again because you're coming out of Melbourne winter. And so the way the game's played when it's wet at the MCG in August compared to the same night at Marvel, that makes a huge difference. And we didn't adjust well enough, we didn't think. So I'm splitting hairs here a little bit, but coming off summer fast tracks, even last week was 30 odd degrees and hard fast deck. The game was played a little bit more like the way it would be played under the roof at Marvel. But I mean, even if you go back further, and I'm not a huge fan of going back too far, but I think St Kilda would be rightly confident that they have a method at Marvel that has worked at least in patches against us. So that's our challenge. And it's good to acknowledge that because one of the greatest mistakes you can make in footy is look at a game 7 days ago and assume you're going to get something similar the next week. It's a different situation. I thought Adelaide were really hot last week. St Kilda looked a little bit off. And sometimes an opposition can make you look that way. So we disregard that to an extent and focus a little bit more on what they have been able to do against us. And if that makes them feel a little bit more confident, then that's probably justified. And if it steals us a little bit more, I think that's justified too.
Do you enjoy playing at Marvel?
I think I've been fortunate to sort of travel around the world over my sort of professional sporting life and seen some amazing stadiums around the world. It's world class, that place. It really is. Now it is different. And it's the only indoor stadium in the competition. The ball does ping around a little bit. Sometimes I think it can take some time to get used to. And if you had your choice, we only play there, I think we play there twice this year. Our choice would be to play early in the year. St Kilda haven't trained there or played there either, so it's a little bit more even. When you play there round 23, having not played there at all against a team that plays there every other week, then there's an adjustment that takes place. But that's the way our competition's structured. There'd be teams that are in a similar position when they come here to Geelong. But to answer your question, I like the idea that you know what you're going to get. But from a coaching perspective, you don't need to think about the conditions too much. I think it's a brilliant stadium for spectators. I know there's been some sort of controversy over the years, but there's a high bar, isn't it? If the question is, would you rather 90,000 at the MCG or would you rather play at Marvel? Well, it's not really a fair contest. It doesn't mean that Marvel's not a world-class venue.
Chris, was there a temptation to play Sean Manor this week, or does he need another blowout in the VFL?
Oh, there was a temptation. He'll play in the VFL. So I can't give you an accurate forecast as to when he'll come in, other than it'll probably be a situation where we are on the side of giving him a little bit extra. But yeah, there's an argument. I mean, my gut feel is he could come in and play well for us this week. Now, we're not doing that. Whether we wait another week or two, it's somewhere in that vicinity.
With you, obviously, you're a week into Brisbane and you're 6 days, 6 days. You're planning ahead with that at the moment, just in terms of how that looks for best 23s are playing your game. Yeah, a little bit. It factors into our thinking, but it's not a situation where we think something has to be adjusted because we have 2 6-day breaks. I mean, we tend to look on the bright side of these things. We've got a really good record of 6-day breaks. They don't scare us at all. But maybe that is because we do put a bit of thought into sort of selection and managing our list as well. So we had a long-term plan that had to be rewritten when the opening round game was postponed. But yeah, for any complaints we may have, and we don't have many around that situation, the 6-day breaks weren't one of them. Yeah, so he didn't play last week. That was a bit of the management plan. It's always easier when your VFL team plays after your AFL team. So yeah, this is the right time for him to get some match practice. And I think I said it last week, but I'm supremely confident that he will play a good chunk of AFL footy this year. We're just not exactly sure when it's going to be, but
nice to have. We just want to keep him fit and available without sort of running him into the ground.
If Sam McConey keeps up this good run of form, is there a world where Reece and Sam can work together in an AFL side?
Definitely. Yeah, I'd be very surprised if that doesn't happen at some point. And that probably speaks to a little bit the way we're thinking about deconing. Like we're not sitting here saying, oh, this is just all about developing Sam as a player at the expense of the team. We're still doing what we think is best for the team in the short term, but it is multifaceted. We think that, if he can play that position well for us and become the type of guy that helps us in that position, but when we need him to play key back, or even key forward for that matter, that gives us some flexibility. If Sam just played as a deep, tall defender, for 12 weeks straight, it gives us less confidence that we could throw him into the ruck or throw him forward. So we think this is helping the overall balance.
I'm sure you might not be tuning into the media as much as we do, but in terms of the contract stuff, there has been, you guys have been linked to players already at this point of the season. How much of a view to 2026 and beyond do you already have at this point of the year?
Well, I mean, he's in the room. If you want to we'll have a hard stop for me. I'll talk about the on-field stuff and then Matt can come up and do the rest. I mean, in all seriousness, that's actually probably the way it should be. Like these questions, he is much better placed to answer these questions. He's giving me the evil eye at the moment, but your question was, how much time do we put into the longer-term planning?
How much do you spend on that?
Personally?
Yeah, personally, as the senior coach.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot. I think it's a core part of my role to be part of those discussions, but I don't control it, and I don't have decision-making power when it comes to that stuff. But I think it's a core part of my role, to work in collaboration. And there haven't been many situations that I can think of over my 15 years where we haven't come to a position. We might have started at different places, but we've ended up with a unanimous view. And some of those are so easy. Like the what, as I said before, the what you want tends to be easy. So who are you thinking of?
I think Jamara, has been mentioned. Tom
Tick, yeah.
Yeah.
Rao was mentioned. Yeah. Throw Bontempelli in there as well. Yeah. So those guys are what you want. Is do we want them on our list? Yes. Now, what's the cost from a salary cap perspective, from a trading perspective? And I find those conversations fascinating and stimulating. They're actually good fun. So they're easy to start. They're just hard to finish. But I wouldn't. I don't think we have any edge over any other club. I think if there's a club who's not thinking about 26 and 27 now, they're probably behind. And I'd be surprised if that was the case. So I reckon your job's easy. Like throw up any good player in the competition and say, are you interested in them? The answer's likely to be yes, and that way you can link us to them. Like if that's the sort of new reality, then yeah, we're happy to play that game.
The only other thing was the Jackson Archer tribunal this week.
Yeah.
Does it change anything about the way you coach your players? Is everything the same as it has been? Did that reinforce what you already believe about the game currently? Where do you sit on it?
I thought it was an unusual situation, and so in principle, and this is so not referencing that specific situation, in principle, I really support, and we coach our players to keep their feet, and I support the free kicks that were paid for contact below the knees, forceful contact. Like that part being important, it has to be forceful contact. But I thought that situation was a bit unusual, and I think it is okay to sort of comment on these things by saying it's challenging. Like taking a really strong view either way on that one, I think is a little misguided because it was so unusual. I can't think of another scenario that was like that one. Because again, in principle, I like the guy who's coming into the contest with a view to keeping his feet. But when you look at that one, it was like, you keep your feet but have some possibility of actually winning the ball as well. Like sometimes, I think the game's changed, and I suspect this is the overarching view of the AFL. The way you approach contests today are different to the way you were allowed to approach contests 15 years ago. And I think that's a positive thing. And again, we go back to, I'm going to say 15 or 20 years ago, and I think players were, if not implicitly, directly encouraged to approach contests recklessly. We don't coach it that way. I did hear Sam Mitchell say something to that effect that I thought was good for footy at all levels. That the Jonathan Brown running back with the flight of the ball and getting knocked out, I don't think should be encouraged at any level anymore. Now, it's not to dismiss the admiration we have for those guys when it does happen. It's just not something we should be seeking. So it's nuanced, I think, is the answer, and so I don't have a strong view on it. I did think to myself when I saw it, if I were the MRO, I'm not sure how I would. It would have taken me a long time to sort of think through that situation. I think, and I think it is also reasonable because of that to take the view that 3 is a very harsh penalty, but none wouldn't have been enough. So it sort of adds that extra wrinkle in that maybe there should be some discretion, you know, in those extreme situations where, where you get a rare situation that. So I don't think anyone would have had a huge problem if that was 1 or 2. Put it that way.